I New Hope. Out here trying to get a little fresh air and a little quiet too on this April afternoon. Uh, as many of you know, this past Sunday we had the opportunity to jump back into the Gospel of John, this book that we were studying last year and then walked away from for a while. Now we're coming back, and as we've come back, it's given me opportunity to go back and read some of the chapters, sections of this book that we've studied already. But I can't help now as I read them to read this against the backdrop of everything that we're experiencing as a church, as a nation, as families who are going through a global pandemic that we've never experienced anything like before. So I was recently reading through John chapter 11 and 12, and what's in there is really perhaps the most amazing account in the whole Gospel of John. There's the account of the death of Lazarus and the resurrection of Lazarus. Many of you know the story. Jesus' friend Lazarus is going to die. Jesus gets word of this. He doesn't rush to Bethany, Lazarus' hometown, to rescue Lazarus. Instead, he delays. He allows Lazarus to die, and eventually makes his way to Bethany after Lazarus has already passed away. And as he's arriving in Bethany, he's met by one of Lazarus' sisters, and also Jesus' friend, Martha. And she says what we might expect her to say as a woman who believed in Jesus. She said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." You see, she was disappointed in Jesus, in a sense, disappointed that he had not come earlier, but she's already trusting him, in spite of the fact that he allowed her brother to die. And then later on, Jesus says this to her: "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." And then just a line later, he asks her this question: "Do you believe this? Do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life, and that whoever believes in me, even if he dies, he will live again, because I have power over death. I am able to free those who believe in me from death, so that they no longer need to fear death." And she answers, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." Soon after this, Jesus does in fact raise Lazarus from the dead. A couple of days after that, his family holds a dinner in his honor, a feast for Jesus. And in the middle of that feast, Lazarus' other sister, Mary, walks in and does this. She took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. It's an incredible scene. It's meant to remind us of the temple in Jerusalem, where God was worshipped with fragrant perfumes, incense, oils. That's what's going on here. When Mary walked into that room, anointed his feet with the most precious substance she had, the best that she had, and then uses her own hair to wipe and dry his feet, she is worshiping the Lord. She's worshiping her King. She's humbling herself and giving him all that she has, offering it up as a sacrifice to him. And so as I read those passages, I couldn't help but think about the time that we find ourselves in. Mary and Martha, Lazarus, sickness came near to their home. In fact, death invaded their household. They were no doubt, they were afraid, they were confused, they were frustrated, maybe angry, So many emotions going on. They, and yet, when sickness and death came near to their home, how do we see them respond? Yes, they mourn. Yes, they grieve. Yes, they are scared. There's no doubt, and the Bible's honest about all of that. Nevertheless, these two women, they trust Jesus and they worship Jesus. In the face of sickness and death, in the face of loss and confusion, we see Martha saying, I believe. And we see Mary pouring out worship. Trust and worship. I think Mary and Martha set a model for us in how to respond to sickness and how to respond to days of uncertainty. They show us what it looks like to trust and to worship Jesus, even when He's not rescuing us in the way that we might expect. How to trust and worship Him, knowing that He's promised us life everlasting, no matter what happens to us in this world. So, as we walk through this season together, and we're afraid, maybe some of us are fearful, some of us are depressed, frustrated, longing for it all to be over. It doesn't make sense for us to just push all those thoughts and emotions out of our head, ignore them, push them down, and just pretend like everything's fine. Instead, I think it makes more sense for us to ask ourselves some questions. So I've actually put down some questions, and I've sent them to you, church, in an email, and they're just questions to maybe get our minds and our hearts going. Maybe you can come up with better questions than I did, but questions to help us start thinking about what we really are fearing right now. What it is that we're afraid of. What it is that we're worried about. And rather than pushing that worry and that anxiety out of our heads, confronting it and asking ourselves, what will it look like for me to begin to trust Jesus in this area? And asking Jesus for the grace we need to trust Him in this area. It's also worth asking ourselves, how are we worshiping Jesus right now? What are we doing to lay ourselves before Him, offer ourselves up to Him, humbly, thanking, praising, and honoring Him as King and as Lord? How are we worshiping Him? As individuals, as families, and as a church? I said this on Sunday, and I do believe it's true, that if we're going to not just survive through this very odd and confusing season, it's going to take more than just courage and good hygiene. It's going to take trusting and worshiping Jesus. So let's help each other do that, New Hope. Let's encourage us towards Him, even as we wait for Him to bring the final rescue that we know He will one day deliver.